Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third webinar in our Emerging Markets webinar series in association with UK Trade and Investment and the British Chambers of Commerce. My name is Gemma Price, and I am the Content and Community Manager at Open to Export. For those of you that are new to our webinars, Open to Export is a free online community where UK businesses come together to help each other become better, smarter, and more confident doing business abroad. We are proud to be supported by our founding partners, UK Trade and Investment, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Institute of Export, and HIBU. If you haven't already, please do visit opentoexport.com, where there is a wealth of guides, webinars, and forum discussions on anything to do with export. Now, this is the first webinar in the series, which provided an overview of a new initiative between UK Trade and Investment and the British Chambers of Commerce. It provides businesses with an improved range of services from local exports to help you research, break into and expand in high growth but often harder to access markets. The rest of the feature will focus on local experts sharing insight about opportunities and key considerations doing business in these three regions. And today we're focused on Latin America. Now, we're very lucky to have with us Greg Holland from the British Chilean Chamber of Commerce, Matt Yuki from UK Colombia Trade as expert speakers on the region. And we also have Rose Woodman from the British Business Mexico group on hand to help take your questions during our Q&A session. Now, you can ask a question to the expert panel using your chat box, which is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can during our dedicated Q&A session. If we don't manage to get to yours, we will try and follow up after the webinar. Last point, don't worry about taking notes. We will be recording this entire webinar and uploading it to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/open-to-export in the next 48 hours. On our YouTube channel, you'll be able to watch back the rest of the series and all of our other webinars, so there really is a wealth of content on there. So let's get things started. What I'm going to do is hand over to Matt Yuki to take us through the rest of the slides. Matt, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hi, good afternoon, UK. This is the third webinar in the Open to Export webinar series. This is a chance to explore Latin America and in particular the Pacific Alliance. More on that later. My name is Matt Yuki. I represent UK Colombia Trade. I'm speaking to you today from our offices co-located in the British Embassy in Bogota. I've been here based in Colombia for about, since September 2010, working primarily as a business journalist during that time, and I joined UK Colombia Trade in November last year. My speciality is in the oil and gas, mining, and agriculture sector, but we also have specialists, trade development managers in UK Colombia Trade, focusing on professional services, retail, healthcare, and other key sectors. Later on, I'll be joined by my colleague Greg Holland from BritCham in Chile and Rose Woodman from the British Business Center Mexico for the presentation and the Q&A at the end. We'd like to give you a little bit more insight into Latin America and the Pacific Alliance and some tips of how to succeed in business, and also explain the benefits of working with the LATAM business team as we try to bring you closer to the customer and help increase or begin your exporting process. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have Latin America. Important not to confuse that with South America, which would be considered from Colombia down. It's basically across three continents. Mexico is often considered North America. You have Central America with Panama, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, and those countries. Also some parts of the Caribbean, such as Cuba and the Dominican Republic. And then obviously you have South America as well. In total, we're talking a total market size of around 589 million people, obviously very significant. In that Pacific, there are four overseas business networks, as you can see there. They're based in Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. But the area of focus of this webinar is going to be the Pacific Alliance, which is a very recent phenomenon. Includes four countries, Chile, Colombia, Mexico and Peru, united in the fact that all are sort of improving in their business, in their business, ease of doing business in the countries and also investment and exports. There are several FTAs in the region. Mercosur is the longest standing and probably the best known. That comprises of Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay. But it's important, although people tend to treat this area as a bloc, the countries in Latin America can be quite different in culture and their economic situation. The sizes of the markets also vary greatly. Okay, next slide, please. Now, traditionally, the UK has had historic business and cultural ties to Latin America. Here in Bogota, in the area where I'm sitting, actually, you'll see lots of kind of English architecture. There's old train lines built by the British. If you go down to Buenos Aires as well, for example, you'll see lots of suburbs with British names. It's been historically a strong British influence in the sort of 19th and early 20th century. But since then, in recent years, those trade links have diminished. A lot of UK export, well, the majority of UK exports these days go to Europe. It's an easy market, but it's limited in size and it's quite saturated with slow growth. Other European countries, however, while the UK's commercial ties to Latin America have diminished over the last 2 or 3 decades, other European countries have increase their trade quite dramatically here. Germany, Spain, France have all got a very strong trade ties with South America and Latin America. And they also have very strong business delegations here in country. One of the great things is this is a very large market, like I said, almost 600 million people, and they speak basically 2 languages, Spanish or in Brazil, Brazilian Portuguese. So language isn't a barrier that's going to be too difficult to overcome for companies looking to export or grow their businesses in Latin America. Next slide, please. So one thing I forgot to add is that it's generally as well in these areas quite a young population. The average age in Mexico is only 27, and there's a very strong growing middle class. Lots of people, Brazil would be the classic example. Over the last 10 years, dozens of millions of people have come out of poverty and moved into the middle class. And I think countries like Mexico and Colombia could see a similar growth of the middle class and consumer spending power over the coming 10 years. Okay, so on this slide, we're going to look at some of the trade blocks that exist in the Latin American region. There's a Central American trade bloc, a Caribbean trade bloc, Mercosur, which is probably one of the most well-known, and then the Pacific Alliance. And so what we're showing here, top right is where you want to be for export, basically. You have an improving business environment in these countries, and you also have strong economic growth prospects. The Pacific Alliance, as I said, is a very new project. It's eliminating trade barriers, working to standardize some processes and certifications in areas such as healthcare. It's also creating visa-free travel. They're also having a joint stock market as well, which is slow to take off, but it's another example of how they're trying to integrate. So it's an area where if you put all these 4 countries together, they would be the 6th largest economy in the world. It represents more than a third of Latin American GDP, and there are a number of countries on the waiting list, such as Costa Rica. So the bloc has the opportunity to grow further. There is a slight focus on Asia. The Pacific aspect, all of these countries at the moment have a Pacific coast, but it's not exclusively aimed at exporting to Asia. Mexico and Colombia also both have Atlantic ports and Atlantic oceans. We expect to see further strong integration of the Pacific Alliance in the coming years, and this will facilitate UK companies investing or trading to one of these countries, using it as a sort of base to export to the other countries within the alliance. Next slide, please. Okay, this is to give a very brief point. This is to show the potential of the markets we're talking about. This has been the average GDP growth. This is a period of 10 years. It's not a flash in the pan. We've seen very strong growth from Brazil. There's been times when Brazil's been growing at around 10%. Chile, which has the highest GDP per capita in the region, has also got a very strong GDP growth. Colombia at over 5%. That has the potential to grow if there's a signing of a peace deal. And Mexico as well, again over 3%, but with a lot of reform coming, has the potential to grow even faster. This is much stronger, for example, than comparable growth with EU countries. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, there is difference between the countries. Brazil has by far the largest population in Latin America, but it's also quite a complicated market to access. It's a bit more protectionist, as it's more difficult to get visas and start businesses. Chile is one of the smaller ones. Colombia's got a population of 47 million, and Mexico as well is a very large market. It's the largest in the Pacific Alliance. And here on the slide next to it, we'll see that GDP per capita does remain low in most countries, but it is rapidly increasing as more and more people escape poverty and join the middle classes. Next slide, please. I think from here, I pass over to Greg at BritCham Chile to take off about the leading sectors in the markets we're looking at. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Matt, for that excellent introduction to Latin America, and specifically Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, which are the exciting markets leading the region in terms of sustained growth, ease of doing business, and disposable incomes. My name is Greg Holland, and I head up the British Chamber of Commerce and BritCham Business Services here in Chile. It's winter here. We normally have more sunny days a year than we do in England, but I think today actually it's sunnier in the UK, so jealous of your sunshine there. And I've just come back from the UK, where I spent 2 weeks at part of the International Festival of Business in Liverpool. I've actually been in Chile for 11.5 years. Started running a British utility business, which had 49% government shareholding, then as a renewable energy consultant, and finally starting my own small business before joining BritCham at the start of 2012. So I have a broad experience of working at the political level and with big businesses, as well as knocking on doors, walking the streets, and cold calling. Over the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to talk you through the local sectors and opportunities, a bit about what the local overseas business networks can offer, something about the business centers themselves, and can give you some tips about doing business in Latin America. Here is a listing of some of the key sectors in each country. We are identifying as important either because of the size of the sector in each market, or we know that the forecast investment is big, or because we have other information that informs us that the potential opportunities are great. In Chile, starting off with Chile, mining really drives the economy. It's the world's largest producer of copper and lithium, third in molybdenum, and important in gold and silver. The forecast investment up to 2020 is 120 billion US, with much of that money going to changing from open cast mining to underground. We expect to see similar levels of investment in energy and infrastructure, and there will be secondary opportunities in all links and connections in the supply chains. There is particular emphasis and focus on the moment on increasing levels of automation, on innovation, modernization, and optimization. In 2013, Colombia created a new national infrastructure agency with new public-private partnership regulation, and is planning to spend about 100 billion US by 2020 to improve roads, ports, rivers, rail, and airports. For oil and gas, there are only 7 years left of onshore reserves, and over 75% of offshore areas are not yet explored. Current bidding round going on with the state oil company Ecopetrol, which is due to invest 85 billion US in exploration and production in the next 5 years. Since 2004, Mexico has become a global leader in the aerospace sector with an average annual growth rate of 20%, and it now boasts 270 companies and supporting entities. There continue to be great opportunities in the supply chain sector. As in Colombia, the oil and gas exploration and production is being driven offshore, and Pemex, the Mexican state oil company, is looking overseas for help and expertise. UK is a global leader in this area. Retail is booming in Santiago, retail is booming in Bogota, in Mexico, and really across the region. It's driven by an increasing middle class for more money to spend and the hunger for luxury goods. They love the British brands, and there are opportunities for all shapes and sizes. Also in education, services and healthcare, there are innumerable opportunities, and the overseas business networks are working in all these sectors to identify and highlight the most important areas for British businesses who are interested. We will be sharing these leads on Export Britain, Open to Export, and through the UKTI resources. Next slide, please. What we can offer you in the overseas business networks is a front door to practical export support from both the private sector and government. Practical advice from business experts and entrepreneurs, saving you time and money, such as how to trade in each market, about the business culture, what works, what doesn't work, what to be mindful of, information on opportunities, access to local businesses and potential customers, legal and regulatory issues, etc. End-to-end support with accredited UK Chambers of Commerce. Working closely with the UK Chambers, we can ensure that you are supported at home and abroad. And also access to a network of UK and local businesses in market who can share with you knowledge, expertise, intelligence, and opportunities. Next slide, please. Our core international trade services, these things are available in all markets, and all countries will provide these core services. There will be some additional services which I'll show you on our following slide, but the core services include connecting with business experts, business-to-business advice and support via digital media, Export Britain, Open to Export, webinars, video conferences, and regular face-to-face visits and events, hosting in-market trade delegations and missions. We can provide startup support, business centers, networking, hot desking, informal mentoring, contact services, introductions to local business networks, buyers, agents, distributors, and local events. Professional business services, introductions to legal, financial, accounting, translation, and all sorts of professional advisory services, and even formal mentoring. We can help you to build your market share, to gain market penetration, support to expand into secondary cities, and even into other countries in the region, larger geographical markets. We can work with you on strengthening partnerships and help to identify new opportunities, build joint ventures, launch new products, and strengthen local market strategies. We can also help to grow your regional presence by introductions to regional agents and distributors and other business networks. We can provide access to business support in other markets in the region and introduction to international business networks in neighboring markets. I think it's very important to mention here that the countries we're talking about today are the easiest markets to enter, and they make great stepping stones for secondary access into Argentina, for instance, into Brazil, where perhaps just at the moment setting up and starting out is much more difficult. Next slide, please. Okay. Some additional services that we provide. I don't think I'm going to talk through all of these, but these are all things which we think are important. Things such as market overview, research, and sector analysis. Clearly, the countries we're talking about, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, they're all a fair way away from the UK, and doing your homework up front is really important. Tariff and customs search, government relations, relocation support might be important if you're planning to come out here and stay. Helping you with the language, certainly understanding competitors, and maybe one of the most important things of all, I think Matt mentioned it earlier, is cultural awareness and tips about the language. It's very, very relevant that you need to understand the cultural differences of where you're working, market in market. Next slide, please. Business centres, the British business centres are new, upgraded business spaces to make it easier for you to get set up in overseas markets. As demonstrated in the pictures on the slides, these show the business centre in Mexico. It's in one of the best business areas in Mexico City, where you can hot desk, rent office space. I'll just use the centre to get help, advice, information, or meet the local business networks, UK business networks. As I said, in Mexico there is a dedicated business centre, but in Chile and Colombia the same facilities are provided virtually through vetted third-party facilities. In all cases, we want you to experience a soft landing with enough backup to enable you to maximize your time and resources during visits to assess and develop your potential in market, and not to waste time when you could be talking to partners, distributors, or agents. Next slide, please. Okay. There's some top tips on doing business in Latin America. And I do think it's really important here to re-emphasize that each of the countries we're talking about, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, we all speak Spanish, but the culture is quite different, and the culture in the other Latin American countries is different as well. Generally, LATAM is still a developing region and culturally quite different to the UK. Each of the countries has their own characteristics, but generally things move slower, and you need more time to explore options and close deals. One thing that I learned early in my business here was that you can't change everything to suit your way of doing things, and to try and do so is a mistake. You need to find out how they do things locally and how you fit and you put your business and your business model within the local environment. I think you'll also be surprised sometimes that it may be different, but not necessarily inferior. And you certainly can't change one segment of the value chain without affecting the whole business. So think hard, understand the culture, and use us to help you with that. In all these markets, we've been around for a long time. Nearly all business is done by first identifying and then developing relationships. They like to know what sort of person you are and to develop a level of personal trust. International business is fairly new to these countries, and historically, you would only do business with someone you knew or that came highly recommended by someone that you knew. This is one area where the overseas business networks can really add value, as we are small teams, but we have a big outreach in terms of our networks. Here, for instance, in Chile, we have a board of directors of the British Chamber of Commerce who are all senior businessmen who have been in Chile for a long time, or they're Chilean, and they know the business community very well. I would also recommend that you don't expect to be able to achieve too much in one trip. The distances are great. We're all in one continent, or North and South America, but getting from the north of Mexico to the south of Mexico is the same as going to Dubai, and flying from Mexico City to Santiago is an 8-hour trip. So the distances are big, and you need to make the most use of your time. Lastly, I'd say don't be afraid to be very British. The UK brand is very strong and popular and synonymous with quality. On the contrary to being afraid of being British, make the most of it, because on many occasions that is what they're looking for. But don't be arrogant. It's also great if you can talk about something they like, which could be football, Downton Abbey. We launched the third series of Downton Abbey here in the Ambassador's House, overbooked for people who wanted to attend. They love the Beatles, if they're getting on a bit. They like One Direction, and they love the royal family. They may actually know more about some of those things than you do. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm just going to go very briefly through a couple of recent case studies that we have here. The first is something we've been doing and developing in Chile in the healthcare area. It's with a company called BioEden, who are a high-tech company that has a banking service for dental stem cells. This is a very interesting case. They've only started, they've been in business for 3 or 4 years. They're already operating in 60 countries. They've identified Chile as a very strong potential market, and they started off working with UKTI to do the initial market research. They organized a big launch event with them, but they've now come to Britchan Business Services to help them develop their business model, which is actually a local franchise. The reason I mention this one is it's high tech. It's actually a great example of how we are working between the different agencies, between UKTI, for instance, and ourselves here in Chile, and how even a big business in the UK or a very fast-growing business can appear as a small business here in market that needs all the help that the overseas business networks can offer. We're also working with companies, a lot of small companies. I can't mention the names, obviously, because of confidentiality, but we're talking about magic, we're talking about electric components, we're talking about alcoholic beverages, and many other niche markets or markets where the British brand is going to stand those companies in good stead. The second case study is a very well-known company. This is actually going on right now in Colombia. Waitrose have been trying to get into the region and are currently working with UK Colombian trade to help them enter the market, looking for a partner, looking for help understand the market, and setting up meetings and doing follow-up negotiations in market. I should mention that Waitrose are also recently entered in Chile, working with a big supermarket called Unimark. And this is something we are seeing actually with some of the bigger companies coming into market, that they're entering 2 or 3 of the markets simultaneously. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I have just talked through the Waitrose case. You were looking at the BioEden slide. I'm not going to repeat that. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. It only really leaves me to mention that if you are interested in anything that we've talked about collectively, please do get in touch with us. The contact details are here on this slide. We'll be delighted to hear from you and to have an informal, no commitments chat about what you're thinking about and what we can offer locally. And just to reinforce that we do a tailor-made solution for every business. There's no one single solution that helps everyone the same, so we are very well prepared to help you individually if you're interested. Next slide, please. And just to mention contacts who will be useful to you in the UK as a first start: Export Britain, which has contacts in export support from the International UK Business Network, Open to Export, and directly with the British Chambers of Commerce. And of course, UK are still there, who we are working very closely with to help. Thank you very much. Hand over to Gemma now to finish the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and also thank you, Matt. So what I'm going to do then is open up the Q&A discussion. Greg, if I could start up with you, actually, picking up on your point about Downton Abbey, It strikes me that there may be an appetite for creative services. We have had a couple of questions come through on this as well. Can we get, do you have a gauge on the appetite for UK content? Does it need to be localized to the relevant language, or is English kind of okay for that?
No, not at all. They watch it as it comes. I think the people who are Anglophiles have learned to speak English. They also love Mr. Bean. They also love Adele. There are a huge number of music concerts here in Santiago every year with big names like Pink Floyd. Iron Maiden is very popular. So all segments of the community, really, young and old, have a very British connection. And you see lots of people walking around the streets, and this is not only Chile, this is across the region, with Union Jacks on their T-shirts.
Oh, how interesting. I see. And Matt, are you there? Can I bring you into the discussion? What's the appetite like in your market for creative services, and particularly kind of broadcast content, print media, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would agree. It's funny to hear. Greg's actually quite far away from me in Santiago. I think it's about a 7-hour flight, but it's a very similar thing here. The Union Jack T-shirts is one thing. Arctic Monkeys sold out in about 2 hours when they came here, so I didn't have the chance to get a ticket. But as Greg mentioned, there's a very strong demand, and parts of Colombia, especially Bogota, for example, is very Anglophile. There are a number of sort of British advertising and PR companies working out of Bogota, and have been very successful in that area as well. So in terms of print media, I know the print media here is growing very rapidly. They've just opened a second English language city paper in Bogota. There's a website doing very well, sort of providing news and information about Colombia. So I would say it's one of the areas of strong growth in Colombia as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Greg. Sorry, thanks, Matt, as well. Just going to Greg, we had a question in from Colin. Are any of the Latin American countries more technologically advanced than the others with regards to infrastructure such as broadband or satellite communications? Starting with you, Greg, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, didn't hear all of that, but I think I got the gist of the question. To give you some statistics, I think 6 out of 10 people in Chile, at least, and it's similar across the region, actually are used to buying on the internet. Chileans are the 3rd biggest Facebook users globally. Businesses are very much into high tech. You can choose from about 6 different telephone providers just by putting a different code in to get different tariff arrangements for different types of call. All the motorways, obviously, they're paid tariff motorways in South America, Latin America. In Chile, around Santiago, they're automatic. You don't have to stop to pay a toll. You just drive through, and it logs your usage. So I guess in summary, there is a huge opportunity for high tech. There's a huge opportunity for electronics, and I think I mentioned automation. Anything to do. The Chileans are early movers. As soon as an iPhone comes on the market, they want it. As soon as anything new comes on the market, they want it, and they like to beat their friends.
I see. Interesting. And Matt, how's your market in comparison to that?
I would say it's probably not as developed. Certainly, sometimes stuff in Colombia seems a bit more labor-intensive, where some technology and automation could be quite useful in a number of areas. There are obviously phone providers here with very good services in terms of 3G connectivity, internet, and data and roaming. One area they are lagging behind in, and I think it's more of a cultural issue, is online payments. That's people in Colombia have been historically very reluctant to sort of give their credit card details out over the phone or on the internet, and I think that's slowed it down a bit. But we are seeing already as well interest from British companies who have online payment systems and sort of facilitated processes. So I'd say there's probably more work to be done in Colombia, but it's also a significant market. We're talking 47 million people, and internet penetration is actually, you know, increasing at quite a rapid rate at the moment.
Fantastic, interesting. Okay, I do have another question, and it's for all of you really. But Matt, if we start with you, so we have a British exporter asking that he often faces heavy competition from his Chinese competitors when looking at new export markets. He is particularly interested in pursuing growth in emerging Latin America, but he's slightly concerned and wanting some reassurance on the levels of penetration in those markets from his Chinese competitors. Matt, can you tell us to what level Chinese products are currently imported into your market, and if there is strong competition there for his business?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that you should, the Chinese, last week there's a major Chinese delegation to Argentina, for example, and they did a series of sort of bilateral agreements to develop various projects. The Chinese are looking at places like Latin, maybe Africa was their first stop in expanding their sort of global presence, but Latin America's quite close to this. I think they'll go primarily to countries which are less, which have different political situations. Argentina would be one of them. Venezuela would be another example where the Chinese presence is quite high, and that's more of a political reason for those particular Latin American countries. Here in Colombia, for example, I can tell you folks, if I talk about the oil and gas sector, there's a lot of Chinese valves here, for example. In the oil and gas sector, there's a lot of sort of smaller independent companies exploring and producing oil in the sort of the plains of the country near the Venezuelan border, and there is at that level there's a lot of cheaper Chinese equipment. There's also some locally produced equipment as well. In the area I specifically look at, for example, offshore oil and gas, where the UK is very strong, the issue of Chinese competition wouldn't be an issue because the companies involved are very well funded, highly professional, very knowledgeable about international norms and technology, and they would easily choose a British or a higher quality, higher cost product if they considered it necessary. Now so I think the point is it depends on the sector. There is a Chinese presence here for some areas, but at higher levels and with international companies working here, they would consider the quality issue more stringently.
Interesting. Thanks, Matt. And Greg, just taking that same question to you, so particularly looking at Chile now, what's the level of competition and penetration in these markets from British businesses' Chinese counterparts? Greg, are you there with us?
My apologies. I think same as everywhere else in the world. High volume, low value products. Yes, China leads. There's very little doubt about that. Electric components. A lot of stuff is coming from the east. You talk about higher value branded products. If you're talking about retail, in some parts of Chile, you don't see any Chinese vehicles at all. It's all Mercedes, Jaguars, Rolls Royces, and Land Rovers. You talk about shopping, there is no real Chinese presence here. It's all Burberry, Topshop, and other European brands. The big industries here, mining, it's mostly Australian, UK, Canadian presence. Energy, there's quite a big local presence, but again, Europeans. So it really depends on what market. If we had a bit more detail about the product or the service that the interested party was talking about, we could be much more specific about the Chinese competition.
Fantastic, thanks, Greg. And I will encourage the person who asked the question to make contact with you guys individually offline after the session. I just want to see if Rose Woodman is on the line from British Business Mexico. Rose, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic. And I just want to open up that very same question just to you. So I'm not sure if you caught that discussion, but in terms of the competition from China, what's the current level of penetration? What's the temperature in the Mexican market at the moment?
There is quite a lot of Chinese presence, but in some sense, Mexico can actually compete with China.
Okay.
For example, if a company would like to export to the US, it's actually cheaper for them to produce in Mexico and then export to China, to the US, rather than directly from China. So they are present, but it depends on what the company is looking for. Mexico's quite competitive, actually, in that aspect.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think we've got time for just one more question, and I think it's a really valuable one, so I'm going to try and quickly get it to all three of you, if that's okay. Rose, I'm going to start with you on this one, but we've had a great question based around customer service. So we have an exporter from the south of England who is occasionally having trouble with the customer service side of things. They'll reply to inbound communications from potential importers in English, and they're then finding that they're not getting much, if any, of a response. That, I guess, leads the question, how important is localization of your customer services in your market?
I would say that although you can do business in English in Mexico, it's really helpful if you can go there in person. As our colleagues from Chile and Colombia were mentioning earlier, it really helps if you can go to the country in person, get to know the people, and ideally if someone from your team speaks Spanish, I think you do actually get a better response if that's the case in your company.
Fantastic.
It really depends on the company.
Okay, Rose, well, I'll make sure that I put you in contact with the company that asked that question after the session to get them a more dedicated response. Matt, just taking that one to you, how important is localization in Colombia?
Well, I would agree entirely with what Rose said. It's very important to come here, pay a visit, meet some people face to face. But then, obviously, for some companies, it's not going to be realistic to have a permanent presence here. And that's where I think the LATAM business team can play quite an important role. I had a company that came out and had made first contact with a very major oil and gas company here to sell a product, and they had to go through a process to register their product, and they've been working with the company, and their emails weren't getting responded to. They, were writing in English, Spanish, and things didn't seem to happen. But through the contact with UK Colombia Trade, we were able to pick up the phone, speak to the company and the individuals in question. It was a misunderstanding. There was, cross lines. Things often don't happen as efficiently as you would expect them to. But having that sort of personal touch and a personal representative, either of your company or from somebody from the British business networks, then that can actually help speed things along and, maybe work out where you went wrong or how to resolve a particular situation.
Fantastic, thank you. Very interesting, Matt. I am conscious of time. I think that we're getting quite a lot of really valuable questions coming through, so I'm going to let this overrun. Apologies if you do need to get away, if you have a meeting or something. We are recording the entire session, so it will be available on our YouTube channel. I'll make sure that you will get a copy of the link to the recording in your email inbox, but I am going to let this overrun, so if you do need to get away, thank you for your time so far. Actually, I'm going to close that last question down and move on to the next question we've received in. And it's all about patents and intellectual property. So we have an exporter who has patents and IP protection on their product and services within the EU. And they're asking, are those products and that international IP protection, is that still applicable in your market? So Matt, if we start with you, can you guys help with IP, and what happens with EU patents in your markets?
I would not be able to comment on that, and that we have not come across any problems or challenges in that area at present. I would imagine the laws would be very similar to Chile. I imagine Greg might probably have more experience in these fields than myself to answer that question.
Okay.
I can certainly look into it as well after the event.
Yeah, definitely. We'll take all of it because we've received many questions. So we'll be taking a lot of the discussions offline. Greg, interested if you could shed some light on the whole patent intellectual property kind of scenario in your market.
Yeah, very relevant question. Obviously, European patents aren't going to work for you in Latin America. If you've got intellectual property, you need to protect it locally or internationally on a broader sense. We could put you in touch with someone locally. We have members of the Chamber of Commerce, for instance, who work with the Chamber Business Services, who can advise you specifically about not only the Chilean market but the regional markets. But yes, you need to protect your IP, and as soon as you enter the market.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Greg. And Rose, just taking that question to you, is that a similar kind of scenario in Mexico as well?
Yes, you would definitely need to contact someone locally to make sure it does follow all the rules there. I agree with Greg. I don't think an EU patent would work in Mexico.
Okay, thank you for that insight. So I'm going to move on to one of the penultimate questions now. So Rose, if I stick with you for this one. So the question is about currency. We have a company here that mainly trades in GBP sterling. They're interested to know if that's still going to be something they can trade in Mexico, or if they need to switch that into US dollars, and if that's something that you guys could potentially help with.
We could help you with that. You can't trade in pounds, as far as I know, in Mexico. They are a lot more open to dollars. But to give you a more detailed answer, I would have to check with one of our chamber members who could give you more information.
Fantastic. Okay, so it sounds like you guys have got the support on file there and in hand that can help these companies. Matt, can I take that same question to you? So in terms of currency, can a company still trade in GBP in Colombia, or do they need to localize?
They'll need to trade with US dollars.
Okay.
It's all transactions here as well. There's also various different steps and processes to making bank transfers and payments that need to be adhered to as well. Colombia is quite strict on payment processes, especially from payments from abroad, and increasingly now they are having a retention at source for countries deemed fiscal paradises. So there's new legislation in that. It is relatively complicated, but again, we do have the people on the ground in Colombia, lawyers and accountants, who can help with those processes. I shouldn't say it's complicated. There are just some processes that need to be adhered to make sure that you're complying with all the local laws and norms.
Interesting. Thanks, Matt. And Greg, just getting the Chile insight on that as well. Can you let us know about the currency situation there?
Sure. I mean, GB pound's not going to work. You could work in dollars here. I would say it would probably be better to work in Chilean pesos. It's a very stable currency. The financial system here is very strong. The banking system here is extremely well regulated and reliable. Inflation is historically and as a government policy is held at around or below 3%, and they've managed to achieve that consistently over a long period of time. And there is even a measure you can take to hedge against inflation. So I think the problems or the issues around dealing in local currency here are really very few and minor. It's really not difficult to trade in the local currency.
Okay, well, thank you for that insight. It sounds like the support is at hand. We do just have one last question, and apologies if we didn't manage to get to everybody's question. I will go into how we're going to take these discussions offline in just a moment. But just on this last question, and Greg, seeing as I'm with you, if I could stay with you for this one, do you know of, or do you guys have, and not necessarily just within the chambers or the network, going outside of the network, any useful resources or tools online? So when a company is doing desk research into your market, they can be more fully equipped and make more informed decisions.
Yes, I mean, clearly there's a lot of information that comes directly from the government, which informs you about the volume of trade through the ports, what products are being traded, all sorts of sales information about just about everything, actually. But the issue, I think, for people investigating there is it's all in Spanish. So you need someone who speaks Spanish to interrogate the local information. Clearly what we can do is do that and turn it into something that's more understandable. As with any sort of research this type, there's probably too much information, and knowing the right places to go to get the information that you need, which is reliable, is not so easy. But yes, it's there. There's stacks of information.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I'm gonna close the Q&A session there. Now, apologies if we didn't get a chance to get to your question. So we have received a number of sector-specific questions, and for these, we're going to post them on our Q&A forum, and we're also going to encourage you guys and put you in contact with the speakers and their organisations who have kindly given their time today and shared their knowledge and expertise. So what I'm going to do then is I will make sure that we follow up with everybody offline. Now, you can watch this webinar back on our YouTube channel. You can also watch all of our previous webinars, including the 2 previous webinars in this very series. So do please allow 48 hours for the upload process to complete. We will also mail you out that link as soon as it is available. There is masses of free help, support and conversation available at your fingertips. So becoming part of the Open to Export community is free and easy. If you've also enrolled as part of your registration process for this webinar, your unique password will be coming out to you very soon. If you're already part of Open to Export, thank you very much, and please do continue to be part of our community. If you need any advice, guidance or clarification, simply post your question on our discussion forum or tweet us using the handle @OpenToExport to get an answer from our community of peer businesses just like yourself, and also the community of experts like our speakers that we've had on the session today. So final thing then, just don't miss the next webinar. We're focusing on emerging Southeast Asia, and we're going to be looking at the opportunities, considerations, and the market support that's available to grow your business in the Southeast Asian markets. We have some really great speakers, as you can see that on the slides, and further information will be emailed out to you a little bit closer to the time. So I'd just like to thank you all for sticking with us if you got this far, and for taking the time out to be part of our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.